Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today's presentation. I'm super excited to speak to all of you today on how to unlock product growth with big data, data science, and machine learning. I want to add that I'm not speaking on behalf of Microsoft, but rather sharing the knowledge and experience that I have gained in my journey along the way, and the themes and messages that I bring forward are that of my own. So, yeah, without further ado, let's get started. So here I have five companies. I just want to drive home the fact that how these companies are using data to drive their product growth. So first we have Netflix. So Netflix uses data for building their recommendation model. So all the amazing movie recommendations that you see, it's all driven by data. They also use data to decide what kind of movies they want to what how they want to invest their money into generating what kind of content that's resonating with users. They also use data to decide which movie to store in which CDN location that is closer to the user so that the movie streams efficiently for users for them to have a better movie watching experience. Next up, we have Tesla. So Tesla has all of these sensors and cameras that is sending data constantly back to Tesla to drive their autonomous driving system. And they also use data for, in general, improving their autonomous driving system and improvising their self-driving cars. Next is we have Amazon. Amazon is one company that uses data across their entire product life cycle to drive product growth. So it uses data for when you search something for their search recommendation. They use data for their pricing strategy. They use data for their warehouse optimization, for their inventory management. Amazon is one company that uses data in many, many ways. Next is you have Instagram. All of you are familiar with it. All the reels, all the recommendations, all the posts, everything that you see, it's all driven by data. There is a machine learning model that's running real time that is using data from other similar users, that is using your data, your interaction data, your engagement data, all of it to decide what kind of content to show you in order to keep you really engaged on the platform, in order to drive their product growth, in order to make customers engage with their advertisements that they show to bring revenue. So that is something that is their business model, and that's how they use data to drive their product growth. Finally, we have Microsoft 365. This is where I work as a senior technical product manager, and how we leverage data to build the entire lifestyle, entire experience to optimize your productivity suite experience. Now we also have Copilot that's integrated into Microsoft 365 that you can use to, that again helps you be more efficient, and that's again driven by data. So what I want to drive home the fact here is that all of these companies, they have a huge customer base that generate a huge amount of data, and today's storage and compute and processing has become so cheap that you can store all of this data and extract insight from it, and then in turn use that to drive product growth and business growth. So let's say you join as a product manager for any of these companies. As a product manager, when you are owning the entire product lifecycle, you are getting data from disparate sources. You're getting data from various channels, various sources, such as engagement channel, revenue, sales channel, feedback channel, usage channel, telemetry, all these different data that you're getting. What you want to do as a product manager in order to drive product growth efficiently is you want to organize it in a very clever way, in such a way that you can extract insights from it and use that in turn to drive. So this is where your data science algorithms and data science techniques come in play, is how do you organize data in a clever way such that you are able to extract insights that in turn gives you information to improve your product. So which is why I say that today the melding of data science and product management is the future of technical product management. So in this talk, what you will see is how to build data-driven products backed by insightful analysis, and how do you utilize big data, data science, and machine learning to inform complex product decisions. So here you have the product life cycle. Here I've broken down the different kinds of data that I use in my day-to-day basis to drive product growth. So some of them are leading indicators in the sense that you get these data very early on in the product life cycle that you can in turn use to drive your growth. Whereas some are for which you need your product to have been deployed, for which you need customers engaged, for which you need customers using your product for a certain duration of time until you get the signal back to you, which you can then run analysis on, which you can then extract insights in turn. So you have funnel analysis, segmentation analysis, and engagement analysis. These are some leading indicators. And then you have A/B experimentation, machine learning, feedback analysis, and retention analysis are which lagging indicators, which at least for which you need a month time in order to get these signals back in order to efficiently make conclusions. Since we have only 30 minutes today, I might not have time to go into all of these different analysis methods, but we will see a few of them in detail. So first is funnel analysis. Funnel analysis is nothing but a method used to analyze the sequence of events leading up to a point of conversion, right? Let's say I'm a product manager for Amazon. I have an e-commerce website. So I have some customers coming to my website, but not all of them will take all the different actions on the page. Some of them will go search for a product that they want to purchase and then visit the product details page, of which some of them will be interested in the product. They will add the product to cart, of which a certain percentage of users will go to the checkout, and then of which a certain percentage of users will enter the payment details and complete the whole purchase flow. So if you see here, the entire thing is you want all customers to take all of these actions, but that will not happen. Customers keep dropping at different stages of the funnel, which is why the funnel keeps getting shorter and shorter. The ideal journey is the whole thing, but customers keep dropping off. So you see 100%, of which 60% went to the product details page, 30% added to cart, 10% went to checkout, and 3%. So as a product manager, let's say if you owned an email sign up flow, right? If you had this data in the form of a funnel, you're able to visualize where exactly are customers, majority of my customers dropping off in the funnel. And once you have this data, you can hypothesize what exactly is going wrong. And then you can run different experiments. You can validate your hypothesis and in turn improve your product. So let's say in this, I see that majority of customers are dropping off at the home screen itself. Then maybe I can hypothesize that the page is too slow, customers are losing interest, and that's why they're dropping off. Whereas if you see that majority of customers are dropping off at complete checkout flow or at the payment stage, then you can hypothesize that, hey, maybe that the price is too expensive, or maybe that my competitor is giving a better price. So once you have this data, once you have these different hypotheses, you can run experiments, which I'll talk about in the later half of the presentation, on how do you run A/B experiments and how can you use data strategies to actually validate your hypothesis and in turn improve the overall product experience. Next is segmentation analysis. Segmentation analysis is nothing but how do you slice and dice your customer into different segments, in turn identify your different customer segments and target your product differently for different segments. So here I have a 2D scatter plot, and here I am organizing my users on two different dimensions. One is income and age. So you see here I've marked 3 circles which are outliers. You can attribute them as outliers. But then you see like 4 distinct clusters of users you see when you segment your users based on these 2 dimensions, right? One could be students because they are younger in age, they have lower income. Then you have techies. Here you have somewhere middle age, middle income. Then you have executives, and then finally you have retired. So here what I'm trying to drive home is that if you're able to segment your users based on different attributes, could be income, could be gender, could be age, could be different things, it will basically give you an insight into the landscape of your product, which in turn will help you make different data strategies to target your product differently for different users. So why is segmentation analysis important? It helps you identify comparable purchase behavior and in turn help you target and market your product based on different segments. So if you don't have a lot of different dimensions that you can cluster your data, you can always start with customer data, and you can always start with demographic data and then use other kinds of data to further cluster your users. So customer data could be something like products purchased, amount spent, time of purchase, purchase frequency. And demographic data could be something like age, income, gender, marital status, education, different kinds of things, geographical data, and things like that. So that was segmentation analysis. Next, we have engagement analysis. So engagement analysis is depending upon your product. The engagement metric that you use to track for your product could differ from product to product. So let's look at some of the different engagement metrics, right? Let's say you are a product manager for a social media company like Instagram or Facebook. the way you measure engagement would be very different from the way you measure engagement for a different product. So let's say if you're for Instagram or Facebook, the way you measure is by looking at likes, by looking at shares, by looking at number of posts, number of comments, time spent. These are some of the metrics that will denote how well customers are engaging with your product, how deeply they're engaging with your product, and how much they really like your product. So let's say you are a product manager for a search company like Bing or Google. What you're really looking at the number of search terms, number of bounce rate, page visits. So if as a product manager, if you have all of this data, you can really nail down where customers are, where which part of your product or which part of your feature is lacking engagement. So let's say now Bing has introduced Copilot, now we have introduced ChatGPT, all of that. If Google is tracking all of these metrics, they will be able to see a drop in search query, they'll be able to see a drop in bounce rate. At that point of time, they can really take data driven decisions to see how can they really fix that problem, and how can they really use understand the entire customer journey using data. Similarly, if you are for a media company like Netflix or Amazon Prime, your engagement metric is very different, right? Here you're looking at views, you're looking at time spent, hours spent, that these are some of the metrics that will denote how deeply customers are engaged with your media profile. Similarly, if you're for an e-commerce company like Amazon or Walmart, you're looking at products viewed, products added to cart, products purchased. So what I'm trying to drive here is that if you want to really understand the engagement of your product, you want to have a dashboard that tracks these metrics on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, on a monthly basis, that will really give you insight into the engagement of your product. So these are some different engagement metrics based on the product, but then you also can have some very generic metrics like daily active users, monthly active users. So user engagement indicates how often customers use your product or how passionate they feel about your product. So again, here I'm just talking about some generic metrics that you can use, like daily active users and monthly active users. And these are some metrics that I track on a daily basis, on a weekly basis for a product that I own, to really understand as we launch new features, as we bring new features to customers, how are these metrics changing, and how can I use that data to understand what is resonating with users versus what is not resonating with users. Next is A/B experimentation. A/B experimentation, let's say if I'm a product manager and I'm sending a Christmas greeting card to my users, I have one variation on the right, I have another one on the left. So maybe the Christmas greeting on the left, customers are more likely to click on it, open it and see it, right? Whereas the one on the right. So here it's a trivial example. In this case, it's a Christmas greeting. I mean, it's not really impacting business metrics and business revenue and things like that on a large scale, which is fine. But that's not always the case, right? So let's say you have an open house website, you want users to click on this open house button, register for the open house, come see the house, so that the house is eventually sold. In this case, it really matters, because if one variation of the button is driving more engagement with the users, then I want to know in a very data driven way that what is it that is working well with this customer, and what is resulting in better conversion rate and better translation rate. So here I have Nike website. There is one search algorithm that's powering the search result on the left, whereas there's a different search algorithm that's powering the search result on the right. Maybe the algorithm on the left results in more customers clicking on the shoes and eventually adding the product to cart and eventually purchasing and eventually resulting in higher revenue. So if you see that A/B experimentation, it's not limited to visual elements on the page, it's not limited to UX things, but you can also totally use it to test and validate different backend algorithms, different search results, different machine learning models, different APIs, and different web services and things like that, to understand how that in turn will drive your product metrics and product growth. So what exactly is A/B testing? It's also called as split testing, bucket testing, randomized control experiment. It's typically used to compare different variations of a web page. And you can test anything from the color of a button to the backend algorithm powering search result to the layout of a page. And you have one group which is called as a control group, and the other one which is called as a test group. And you want to keep all elements constant except for that one thing that you want to really test, and then you measure the outcome. So You have a metric that you test for the entire duration of the experiment, and then at the end of it, you see which one results in a higher conversion rate. And A B experimentation is the best scientific way to establish causality with very high probability. What I mean is that as a product manager, you're not taking decisions with your gut. You're not taking decisions based on your instinct, saying that I think having this color of the button to green will result in higher revenue. No, you're using experiment and you're using data, and you'll run the experiment for 2 months, and at the end of the experiment you will see which variation is resulting in better revenue, and then eventually you will launch the change to all users. That way you're able to take decisions scientifically as opposed to relying on your gut and as opposed to relying on instinct. So, what are the different stages of A B experimentation? You always start off with a problem, and then you define the hypothesis, you design the experiment, you run the experiment, and then eventually you analyze your results and then launch the change to all users. So, problem statement again is depending upon your product. The Your problem statement will vary. Let's say you join as a technical product manager for a booking company, for a travel company like Expedia or Booking. The kind of experiments you run will be very driven by the company's goal. Will be very much driven by the business objectives, business goals, what the company is aiming for that year, what are the goals, right? So let's say for that year, Expedia wants to increase the number of booking, they want to increase their loyalty program participation, they want to increase the number of searches. So your A/B experimentations will be very much driven by the problem statement that your organization or your leadership team is dealing with, because you want to make sure that the results you drive are driving up to the Uber goals of the company, and in turn driving to give better results. Similarly, so you want to make sure that the problem statement, you're very crisp and clear on the problem statement before you even design and run experiments. Next is defining hypothesis. Hypothesis in an A/B experimentation is a testable statement that predicts how changing something will affect a certain metric or a user behavior. So this is the three statement framework that I use for defining the hypothesis even before I design my experiment. Is you start off with a problem based on an evidence, and next is you believe doing something will impact certain outcome and it will improve certain problem, and you know that you have achieved the outcome when you see some metric change. So you want to have these three statements defined for your experiment even before you start it. So let's take one example of how you would define this. So let's say you're a product manager for an e-commerce website. You're seeing lesser units sold through sales data. So you have a problem that lesser number of units are sold, and you have evidence based on sales data. So what is next step is you believe as a product manager that incorporating social proofs, such as when you show X number of people purchased in the last 24 hours, that's your hypothesis, that introducing something like that will create a sense of urgency and influence visitors to make the purchase. So it's like a psychological trigger trap, and customers feel that, hey, they're going to miss out on the product. So that's your hypothesis, that's what you're going to bring, and you're going to A/B experiment this before you launch it to all users. And you will know that this is something that's working or not when you have achieved higher conversion rate based on some metric change. In this case, the metric you will track is revenue and units sold. Okay, the next step is designing the experiment. So when you design the experiment, you want to be really clear on what is it that you're going to track for the course of the experiment. So you will always have one primary metric. In this case, let's say I'm going to track revenue per user per month. You could also have secondary metric. You can also have other metrics that you track, but you also always want to start off with one key metric that will denote the success and failure of the experiment. Next is you want to determine the population that you're going to run the experiment for. Are you going to validate the experiment with all users or certain section of the users? Is it going to be in USA or Europe? You want to be very clear on your target population and scope your experiment to them before you launch it to all users. Next is determining the sample size. So here is a formula that you can use to determine sample size. The industry standard is to use an alpha value of 0.05 and a power of 0.8. That will give you the sample size that you at least need in order to have statistical significance on the results before you drive conclusions on whether the data is significant or not. Similarly, how long do you run the experiment? The general industry standard is you at least run the experiment for 2 weeks, but you also want to take into factor seasonality, days of the week, holidays. You obviously don't want to A/B experiment like an email campaign during holiday season when customers are not even opening their emails, are not checking so much, because then the data would be biased and wouldn't be indicative of the regular business rhythm and business flow. Next is running the experiment. When you're running the experiment, you want to randomly assign the users to both the test group and the control group, and you want to randomly split them in order to make sure that the data is unbiased, in order to make sure that the randomization will ensure that the data is something that you can use to make conclusions and drive results. Finally, you want to work with the dev team to instrument logging. Let's say you're tracking revenue per user per month. You want to make sure that you have a dashboard that's collecting this data, that is surfacing this data, that you can use, that you can see for the entire course of the experiment in order to drive conclusions. And avoid peeking at the results until you've run the experiment for the entire period of time, in order to make sure that you have enough data to drive results. Finally, interpreting the results. You want to make sure that the data is reliable. Some cases, when you're running A/B experimentation, in my case, in the past, it has happened that the data could get corrupted, in which case you want to discard the results, rerun the experiment, and do sanity checks. And you also want to decide the trade-off between different metrics. Let's say you wanted to, as a product manager, you're tracking revenue and engagement, right? You introduced a new change, and you saw that introducing this new change, engagement is going up, right? Customers are engaging more with the platform, but revenue not so much, right? So you want to decide the trade-off between the different metrics, that how the different metrics are doing. In most cases, introducing some change, one metric could go up, another metric could go down, or maybe both metrics are doing really great. So you would really want to track those different conflicting metrics to drive home, to make sure that your change is effectively launching something that's going to resonate well with customers, and then you eventually launch the change when the results are statistically significant. Cool. Finally, machine learning techniques, right? So machine learning is not a magic wand, but it's an application of AI that gives system the ability to learn and improve from experience without being explicitly programmed. In some cases, your general classic programming can solve the case, and maybe you don't need machine learning, right? You just write a bunch of if conditions, you just write your classic code, and then that can solve the case. But when do you use machine learning? Machine learning is a um, uh, great great thing to use when you have lots of data, right? When you have lots of good ethical data, unbiased data, machine learning fits the bill. Next is you have a really complex logic. Like I said, that your search query, right? That is not something that can be solved with classic programming, because you can't anticipate what customers will search, and you can't code up all these different cases that if customer is searching this, show them this, if searching this. That is where you need machine learning, because you want the system to learn with time based on lots of data and based on the customer patterns and behaviors. Next is you want some sort of personalization, right? Let's say Spotify, let's say Uber, you want to show personalize different song. You want to personalize the experience for users based on their characteristics. Like YouTube homepage, you can't use classic programming to solve this case. And then you want the system to learn with time, right? Like take the case of Twitter. What's trending on Twitter today might not be trending tomorrow, right? So you can't use classic programming, because you want the system to learn based on data. Today, maybe customers are talking about something. In a week, they might be talking about something else. Similarly with Spotify, what's trending on Spotify today might not be trending tomorrow, because as new songs come, as new artists come, the system keeps evolving based on user patterns, based on all of this data. So machine learning is typically split into three different types. One is supervised machine learning. The machine learns from training data that is labeled. Then you have unsupervised machine learning, where the system learns based on non-labeled training data. And finally, you have reinforcement learning, where the machine learns on its own. Here I have a few basic examples of machine learning that will help you think how these different algorithms and techniques can be used. So first is ranking. We have seen great example where machine learning can be used to power search results. You have ranking algorithms that driven by machine learning models based on what user is searching. Next is you have recommendation models, collaborative filtering, content filtering, all of these things. They show you recommendation based on your search queries, your patterns, and also based on what other users, similar users like you, are doing on the platform. The great thing about recommendation is it doesn't have to be perfect. As long as it's close to what customers like, it's great. You can give something and the system can learn over time. Next is classification, right? Amazon has millions of products every day. New merchant is onboarded onto the platform. They bring new product. You cannot have a human sitting there and manually tagging, this is a dress, this is a t-shirt, this is a toy, those kind of things. This is where machine learning is works great, because you have all of this data. It can learn and it can predict in real time, and it can automatically assign tags to product based on what the machine learning model is already trained on. Next is you have regression. So let's say you have customer support situation, right? And you can't predict. You can use machine learning, linear regression model to predict how much support tickets you'll get today, how many customer calls you'll get tomorrow, based on historic patterns, based on other things that in the past that you've used. You can use regression to predict what your support volume will look like. This is a great example where machine learning can solve the case for you. Similarly, clustering, we already talked about how Spotify uses clustering algorithm to group songs based on genres. Could be pop songs, could be different folk songs, different things to use clustering. Machine learning algorithm works great. It can do this automatically for you. Similarly, anomaly detection, something like banks. Banks use anomaly detection to tag fraudulent transaction and automatically tag them, saying that, hey, this transaction looks very different from usual patterns. And this is where machine learning can be, because you cannot have a human manually looking at every transaction and doing. So these are some examples where you can use machine learning to really identify different scenarios based on lots of data, historical data, complex patterns, to help solve the problem. So yeah, in the interest of time, I've just cut down and I've had so much. I'd be interested to take any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Purnima. That was a very kind of information dense overview of the kind of different ways that you can use data. So thank you very much for sharing. I hope everybody out there enjoyed it as much as I did. So if you have any questions, please do post them in on whichever platform that you're watching. But we do have a question from Keshav. And his question, I'll just paraphrase it a little bit. He's basically said, if you find a problem in your data and it's being corrupted, how do you convince people that it's worth the reinvestment of redoing the research or kind of fixing it and trying to research? Or is there a way you can protect against getting your data corrupted?
Yeah, I think great point. Usually, when you're dealing with a big system, let's say, like in the case of Amazon or Microsoft, in these cases, right, you have huge amounts of data. In my experience, I was a part of a project that I was involved in analyzing petabytes of data, and we did some analysis. And then at the end of it, we saw some data and we took some judgment call based off that. And then along the way, we realized, hey, looks like we didn't take some attributes into calculation into our analysis. And at that point of time, we really had to go back and redo our analysis to take those new data sets, those new variables into play, because we wanted to really make sure that the result we are using to drive results are in fact real, in fact authentic, because these are impacting millions of users. It's impacting so many users on such a large scale. So in which case the leadership is already aligned, because you want the analysis to be correct. But in some cases, when you run A/B experiment, when you've already seen that the data is corrupted, it's really unfortunate. But then you still want to be true to your analysis. You still want to be true and authentic to what you're driving for your customers. So you go back and convince the team, saying that, hey, this is something that has happened, we really need to redo it. But now that we already have all the system in place, the pipeline and all of this, it should not be as time intensive to redo it again, but we have to do it. So yeah.
Excellent. We are getting a flood of questions come in. So unfortunately, though, we are out of time. But as I said, we do have a Slack channel. I'll post the link again on LinkedIn and YouTube to where all the questions are coming in. And I'll post the questions on our Slack channel and invite Purnima to, excuse me. sneeze to answer them there. But yeah, so we're out of time for now, but thank you very much, Purnima, for sharing.
Yeah.
And sorry, the last one is people are asking about, is it being recorded? So yes, we will be posting each of the talks separately on our YouTube channel. And so if you follow us on LinkedIn and on YouTube, you'll definitely be alerted when we release each of the videos. So thank you very much, Purnima.
Thank you.